You have to sit him down. Come on, Eric. Come on, ladies.
I got a long lesson today, so you better come on. Last week, we looked at the evidence of the open and empty tomb. If you get it here, we'll start. I think it is. You can't hear me? That's really sad. I don't know what to do. Is that any better? Last week we looked at the evidence of the open and empty tomb. We saw what that evidence caused us to conclude. We concluded that humans could not have opened the tomb. It's impossible. The tomb was secure so that humans could not open the tomb. The Jews wanted it that way. They went to Pilate the night that Jesus was buried, and they said, listen, this deceiver said that after 3 days he was going to be raised from the dead. We want the tomb made secure so that on the 4th day we can display that body ourselves. That's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to kick it out in the street and end Christianity right dead in its tracks. So Pilate gave them a custodia, which is a 16-man security force. We learned that from the Dictionary of New Testament and Old Testament theology that we read from, and we discovered that it was a 16-man security force, 4 people standing guarding, the other 12 laying in a semicircle in front of the tomb, armed, all of them ready, and if somebody would come to attack, these 4 would rush out and attack them, wake the others up, and they would jump up and defend the tomb. But that wasn't all. They wanted the tomb itself to be secure, so they made it property of Rome. They had the tomb sealed, which is placing leather straps across the tomb and then a lump of clay right in the center, and then the centurion would take his signet ring or his pendant that he had that had Rome's seal on it and put it in that wax or that clay. Now it's the property of Rome. You touch this tomb, you've attacked Rome. That's why the security guards were there, to keep anybody that was going to come and take the body from doing so. So the tomb was as secure as it could possibly be. And then on the first day of the week, the scripture says an angel of the Lord came from heaven because there was a large earthquake. And he came down and took the stone away from the tomb and sat on it and told the ladies that were there, look, the tomb is empty. He's risen, like he said. So the angel removed the stone and the tomb was already empty. The body of Jesus was already gone. That's what Mary saw when she went there. She went early in the morning before it was light, and the tomb was already open. She looked inside, and she said, they've taken the body, and we don't know what they've done with it. She didn't know who'd taken it. She just knew it was gone. She went back to Peter and John and told them they'd taken the body of Jesus. We don't know where they put it. They ran to the tomb. John outran Peter, got there first, stooped and looked in the tomb, and didn't go in because he saw the grave clothes lying there. And so Peter went on in the tomb. He saw the grave clothes lying, but he also saw the face scarf that had been around Jesus' head, folded up neatly and placed in a place by itself. And he realized there's no body in these grave clothes. We're going to look at the grave clothes today. They are marvelous evidence because John goes on and says the grave clothes were left lying in the tomb. We're going to see what he meant when he said that, and we're going to try to draw some conclusions from it. First of all, I'd like for you to look at some testimonies of some scholars. It's Dr. Simon Greenleaf, who was Royal Professor of Law at Harvard University, and he was Dane Professor of Law at Harvard University, and he's author of A Treatise on the Law of Evidence in 3 volumes, is still read in every law school today. He said, according to the laws of legal evidence used in courts of law, there is more evidence for the historical fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ than for just about any other event in history. Then Professor Thomas Arnold, who was 14 years headmaster of rugby, holder of the chair of modern history at Oxford University, said, I have for many years studied the histories of other times and examined and weighed the evidence of those who have written about them, and I know of no other fact in the history of mankind which is proved by better and fuller evidence of every sort than the great sign which God hath given us, that Christ died and rose again from the dead. Then we have Lord Chief Justice Darling of England. He says, no intelligent jury in the world could fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true. And John Singleton Copley, who's better known as Lord Lyndhurst, recognized as one of the greatest legal minds in British history, Solicitor General of the British government, Attorney General of Great Britain, 3 times High Chancellor of England, elected as High Steward of the University of Cambridge. He says, I know pretty well what evidence is, and I can tell you such evidence as that for the resurrection has never broken down yet. Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Caldecott, said, my faith began with and is grounded on what I thought was revealed in the Bible. When particularly I came to the New Testament, the Gospels, and other writings of the men who had been friends of Jesus Christ, seemed to me to make an overwhelming case, merely as a matter of strict evidence, for the facts therein stated, the same approach to the cardinal test of the claims of Jesus Christ, namely his resurrection, has led me as often as I've tried to examine the evidence to believe it as a fact beyond dispute. You have some brilliant minds of some important people who have read the evidence that we have been looking at, and they've concluded with their brains that he's risen from the dead. I think you'll be able to reason that same conclusion, if not from last week's lesson, from this. Let's look at the resurrection. We're going to look at the evidence from the burial tomb. The New Testament has been repeatedly verified as reliable historical record. And in their historical records, the gospel writers use the evidence of Jesus' empty burial tomb to prove that he indeed rose from the dead. The empty tomb and the grave clothes left were their proof. The resurrection issue is of vital importance to the Christian. Christianity stands or falls on the truthfulness of Jesus' resurrection. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then the Christian faith is futile, and it would be based on a lie. The facts. The stone was removed. That's the first fact. The second fact is the tomb was open. The third fact is Jesus' body was gone. We looked at all of that last week. The fourth fact is the linen wrappings were still lying there. That's an important fact. There's the tomb. This huge stone is about a 2-ton stone. That's why it's marvelous that the stone is removed. It's removed from the entrance of the tomb. It's not just rolled back, it's removed from the entrance of the tomb. Somebody carried it and placed it away from the tomb. That was strong evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, because men couldn't have done it. Several men could have done it. A lot of men could have carried it. It'd be like picking up one of the cars out there in the parking lot, and all of us men here in the building could probably pick up one of the cars out there. But it would take all of us to move that stone too. But it was gone. And the tomb was open and empty, and the grave clothes were left. Let's look. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but didn't go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. You might think that all they saw were the strips of linen lying around. But the strips of linen had something done with them before Jesus was buried. And so the strips of linen were lying as they were left there. And that's what John says. The Greek that he uses indicates the strips of linen were still lying in their folds, just exactly as they'd been placed there. But the angels of the Lord were sitting one at the head and one at the foot. So they were sitting at the head and the foot of the grave clothes of Jesus, because they still looked like the body was there. John knew the body wasn't there after he went in and examined and saw the face scarf that had been around Jesus' head. It should be inside those linen clothes, but it's not. It's outside, folded up neatly by itself. The evidence of the linen wrappings. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came bringing a this is important, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes. How much? 100 pounds of that stuff. What are they going to do with this? So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices. They used all the spices. 100 pounds of spices. And all of the linen wrappings that what did they do? They bound his body completely from head to foot. And they wrapped it with these spices in it. Now the spices are very important, because they're going to cause a substance to happen, an occurrence to happen that people don't really see. The linen wrappings, the specific words used by John in his description of the action taken by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus are significant. They bound Jesus' body in the linen wrappings. They bound it. Get the picture. They've taken these strips of linen cloth and they dipped them in the myrrh and aloes, and they wrapped it around his body. First, there was a linen shroud that the body was laid in. The shroud is 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide. The body would have been laid in the shroud, and the shroud folded over the body. And then wrapped, completely wrapped, with these strips of linen and the myrrh and aloes. Bound, the Greek word translated bound is adison. It means to bind, wrap up, or to tie up. They bound the body with it. The Greek word of translated linen wrappings is orthonoiosis. It is plural, and it means strips of cloth, or swaths, or bandages, all made out of linen. You look at the words that are used in the text, and the words describe exactly what has happened. They've taken strips of linen cloth, wrapped the body completely with it, dipped in the myrrh and aloes. Well, what's this myrrh and aloes stuff? The myrrh and aloes, the balsamindon myra, is a highly fragrant resin that contains a volatile oil. The resin is at first oily, but hardens after it's exposed to the air. The oil evaporates rapidly. What is it? It's sap that comes out of the balsamindon myra tree. You ever seen sap that comes out of a pine tree? You know, it's first oily and sticky, and as it runs down the tree limb, it gets hard. And you hit it with a hammer and it breaks like glass. That's the kind of substance that this is. The aloes is a fragrant wood pounded or reduced to dust. the chief value of the aloes was their fragrance. It's a strong, strong smell. What for? Well, the tomb is near the road. And they don't want the tomb to stink because the body is in there going to decay. And so they want this decay to be covered up with this sweet smell. That's why they use the aloes. However, they are also consisted of an oily resin. When the myrrh and aloes were mixed together, they form a type of adhesive which bonded the linen wrappings together. So they prepared the body for burial, haven't they? They prepared a mummy, is what they've done. And we still open up mummies, and when they find them, and they still have the bodies inside the mummies. Some of the bodies are still there. They've turned to like hard plastic, but they're still there. The bodies are there because they prepared them for burial that way. And that's the way Jesus was prepared for burial, like a rich Jewish citizen would have been buried. Why is it? Because Joseph of Arimathea is a rich man. Nicodemus was a rich man, both of them. And they prepared Jesus' body for burial just like they would be buried. Wow. Burial custom of the Jews. Jesus was buried according to the burial custom of the Jews, at least for those who were well off financially. But Jesus didn't have a penny. These men had all the money. And the burial custom of the Jews in that day was to wrap the body with strips of linen, similar to the manner in which Egyptians wrapped their dead bodies and made mummies. The Encyclopedia Americana explains it like this. Specifically, a dead body was preserved from putrefaction. What are they saying? They're slowing down the process of decay. Wrapping the body like this keeps air from getting in the body. And so it slows down the process of decay, which also is going to make the smell less. And the sweet smelling spice covers the smell. So that's why they did it that way. It also says in the time of Christ, it was the manner of the Jews to bury the body wound in linen cloths with spices. That was the process. And that's how Jesus was buried. He wasn't buried like a beggar, thrown out into an open grave. He was buried like a rich person because rich people prepared his body for burial. Jesus was wrapped in linen strips with the spices. 100 pounds of paste-like spices were placed between the linen straps. That's a lot of spice because it was necessary. And they used all of it, completely saturating them. When it all dried, the body was enclosed in a hard cast. How long is he in the tomb? 3 days. First day it starts to congeal a little bit. Second day a little bit more. Third day a little bit more. It may not be hard yet, but it's enough so far that when the body is gone from it, it stays in its form, as if the body were still there. That's what John saw. That's why he didn't go in the tomb. He thought, the lady's wrong, the body's there, I see it. But Peter went on in. He saw the evidence that caused him to check the grave clothes. This thing's light. There's no body inside here anymore. The face scarf is over here, folded up neat by itself. How did Jesus get out of those grave clothes without disturbing them? How did he get out of the tomb without rolling away the stone? How did he do that? Could humans have done that?
No.
Could humans have gotten him out of there without messing up the grave clothes? No, they'd have to cut him to get his body out, or unwrap them, which they couldn't unwrap them by then. They're already starting to get hard. Lazarus was buried the same way Jesus was. And just as Jesus, Lazarus too was buried according to the burial custom of the Jews. Rich family. He was bound hand and foot with wrappings, the text says. His face was still wrapped with a linen cloth when he came out of the tomb. He was unable to see. He couldn't move because he's wrapped hand and foot. He's in the tomb. When Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth, he wasn't telling him to come out. He was telling him to come back into the body. Then he says, unbind him and let him go. Why does he say that? Because if they leave him bound up, he's going to die again. You see? You need to read the Bible just exactly like the Bible says. You need to understand what it's saying. He didn't come out of the tomb. He just come out of the dead back into the body. And Jesus says, go unbind him and turn him loose. The position of the linen wrappings. John 20 verse 5. John saw the linen wrappings, i.e. the mummy cast, still lying there. There is no indication that they were torn apart, that they were disheveled or anything. Peter saw the mummy cast still lying there. There's no indication that it was disheveled. It's lying there in its folds, still. We got to figure this out, don't we? Humans couldn't do that. They couldn't get in the tomb. First of all, there's the soldiers standing outside to keep them out. They couldn't get in. But the angel of the Lord came that morning and took the stone and moved it away and sat on it. And they stood there still. Like dead men, it said. They were scared. I'd be scared of that guy too. I mean, somebody can come and grab a 2-ton stone and just move it by himself and set on the thing. But he didn't mess with the body. He says to the ladies, look, the body's gone. It was already gone out of the tomb. Remarkable, isn't it? John says in John 20 verse 7, however, the face cloth was not still lying there. It was neatly set aside and rolled up. However, Jesus got out of the tomb. The grave cloth got out of the tomb. The face cloth got out of the tomb with him. It came out with his body. And the cast is still left there. And the grave scarf, or the thing that's around his head to hold his jaws shut, is folded up neatly on a place by itself. How did that happen? The only way I can explain it is this. Jesus could turn from matter to energy at will. He came out of the grave clothes, turned from matter, inside it, matter, turns to energy, passes through the clothes on the outside, takes the face scarf off, folds it up, and neatly lays it over by itself, turns from matter to energy again, and leaves the tomb, solid rock tomb, and passes through the stones. It's the same way that he appeared to the disciples that night when they were locked in a room for fear of the Jews. And he says he suddenly appeared. He just appeared. And they thought they saw a ghost. And Jesus said, come and touch me. Ghosts don't have flesh and bone like you see I have. Do you have anything here to eat? They said, yeah, we got a piece of fish. And he took it and he ate it in front of them, proving that he's not a ghost. That same day earlier, the 2 disciples were on the road going down to Emmaus. And Jesus suddenly appeared, just 14 miles away from Jerusalem, on those feet that had been nailed to a cross, with a wound in his side and his hands all wounded up, beaten. He would have been a miserable mess if he was just a human. He wouldn't look like the risen Son of God. He'd have looked like a torn up mess. But how did he get out of those? How did he get there where they were? Turned from matter to energy and appears. And he goes along with them and talks to them about the resurrection. And then they get to where they're supposed to go and they're going to eat. And they say, stay with us. He was going to go on, but he stayed. He prayed for the food. And as soon as the prayer was over, the Bible says he disappeared. Your Bible says he disappeared. What's disappear mean? Boom, he's gone. And they marveled at that. And they went back and told the others. He turns from matter to energy at will. How do you get back to heaven? That day that he was raised from the dead, Mary came and she wanted to hug him. Remember? He said, "Don't touch me. I've not yet ascended to my Father." Then that night, he lets his disciples touch him and examine him and everything. What happened? Between the morning and the night, between the morning and the time he goes down to Emmaus, he turns from matter to energy, goes back to heaven and appears before the Father. Turns from matter to energy and comes back to the earth and goes down to the road to Emmaus. Turns from matter to energy, goes back to Jerusalem, is there that night. Turns from matter to energy and passes through the walls of the room and goes inside and declares himself risen. That's not amazing to me. I remember a movie on TV that these guys used to say, "Beam me up, Scotty." Anyone remember that? What'd they do? Turn from matter to energy and come up, right? We even believe it could happen. With Jesus it did. With Jesus it's true. There's no other explanation for how he got out of the tomb. None. No other explanation for how he got out of the grave clothes and didn't dishevel them. None. But there are some grave clothes left. There's a linen shroud left that has an image on it that they can't explain how the image got there. They don't know what caused the image. They think that the image was caused by a heat reduction process, like snapping a camera, like the flash of a light, and causes an image on the whatever that film is, and they put the film in water and they develop it, right? Well, the image on the shroud is like this. It's undeveloped. It's like the image that's in the what do you call that thing?
Negative.
Negative. It's like the image on the negative. What could cause that? Flash, suddenly turning from matter to energy, passing through, leaves an image on the cloth. John outran Peter, beating him to the tomb. For some reason, he wasn't in such a hurry to enter the tomb once he arrived. Questions are, why didn't John enter the tomb? What did he see that would have made him hesitate? He saw the linen clothes wrapped like the body's still in them, so he doesn't go in. What did the disciples see? Peter entered the tomb, saw, and believed. What did he believe?
Woman's story.
Not the resurrection, because the next verse says they didn't know the scripture that said he had to rise from the dead.
Women's story.
They just believe he's gone. The body's gone. Somebody's taken the body. They don't have any clue. He believed what Mary had told him in verse 2. They've taken him out of the tomb and we don't know where they've laid him. Mary was in error. She thought Jesus' enemies had taken his body. The disciples didn't yet know that Jesus had risen from the dead. They didn't know that yet. They're not going to know it until he appears to Mary and says, "Mary," and she turns to him and says, "Rabboni." You read that this morning, didn't you? Means teacher. She knew he'd raised from this. She ran back and told, "I've seen him, I've seen him." And then they all see him. And then 500 of them at one time see him, Paul says. And then Paul, the Apostle Paul, when he was Saul of Tarsus, saw Jesus. He's risen from the dead. Actually risen from the dead. Lots of evidence for the fact that he's raised from the dead. What did the disciples see in the tomb? They saw the empty shell of a mummy cast. No one had torn it apart to get the body out. Jesus' body had simply vanished from inside it. Yet the face cloth had been neatly put in a place by itself. Jesus had been in no hurry if he took the time to do that. No wonder John decided to enter the tomb before Peter. He was spooked by what he saw when he looked in. The grave clothes are all still there. There are those who say Jesus didn't really die. That he just passed out on the cross. Ventrini said that. He's an Italian. He said he just swooned. He meant he went into a coma. And in the coma, his body functions all got so low that they thought he was dead. But he didn't really die, he said. According to the swoon theory, Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He simply fainted. Then after regaining consciousness in the cool of the tomb, he walked away. The fallacies of this theory are many. They say he walked away, he went to India, got married, and had children. Crazy stuff. And the Muslims have adopted that theory, and they say the same thing about him. That he swooned on the cross, and in the cool dampness of the tomb, he survived. The problem is, how's he going to get out of those grave clothes if he survived? Huh? He's wrapped hand and foot with strips of cloth on his body. How's he going to get out of that if he's just swooned? And besides that, look at all of the evidence we have for his actually dying. The swoon theory consists of erroneous speculation. It's not based on fact. It contradicts the facts as we have them recorded in history. Here's the facts. Number one, Matthew says he yielded up. He died. He said he died. Mark says he breathed his last. He didn't take another breath after he took his last breath and cried out in a loud voice, "Tetelestai!" which means it's finished. Done. Paid. It said he didn't breathe again. Didn't exhale or inhale either. And the guard who was standing there looking at him said, "Surely this man is the Son of God," seeing the way he died. He'd never seen somebody die like that. I haven't either. Luke says he breathed his last. And John says he gave up his spirit. All four of them say he died. But so did all of the historians that said anything about him, said he died on the cross. That's what Josephus said. That's what the Roman theologians said. The soldiers knew that Jesus was dead. They knew that. That's why they didn't break his legs. They came to break the legs of those on the cross because they wanted them to die quickly. But they didn't break Jesus' legs because he was already dead. And the others suffocated because they couldn't push themselves up with their legs anymore to get a breath. And so they suffocated and died quickly. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and the other who was crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when they saw he was already dead, they didn't break his legs. What did they do? You remember? The soldiers knew he was already dead. But the centurion that was there, standing in front of him, saw the way he died, said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." Truly. Was past tense, he's dead. Was the Son of, he's not anymore, he's dead. The centurion observed Jesus at the moment he died. He referred to Jesus in the past tense, which is was the Son of Man, which indicates that his physical life had expired. The centurion knew he was dead. But Pilate also knew he was dead. Joseph of Arimathea came, a prominent member of the council who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God, gathered up courage and went before Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate, wondering if he was dead by this time, and summoning the centurion, he questioned him as to whether he was already dead. And ascertaining this from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. Pilate made sure that Jesus was dead before he gave up the body. The soldiers made sure Jesus was dead too, because they pierced him in the side. It says, "But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately proof of his death comes out." Blood and water come out. Not blood, just blood. He didn't bleed. It burst forth blood and water when they stabbed him. The Roman pike that they use is a spear that's got a wooden shaft that's at least 6 feet long. The spearhead itself is as long as 3 feet. The edges of the spearhead were jagged. The pierce alone would have killed Jesus if he wasn't already dead. when they rammed that thing up in his side to his heart, which is what he's aiming for, and pulled that thing out, it would have ripped a hole in Jesus. And out came blood and water. Both. Blood and water flowed from the wound which was inflicted in Jesus' body by the Roman. This is a sure sign that the body is dead. Why? Half the blood in our bodies is composed of red and white blood corpuscles. The other half of the blood consists of a clear fluid called plasma. So we have blood and water together. But when they're mixed together, it's just blood that comes out. You bleed. But he came out, blood and water both came out. And John says, the one who saw this knows he's telling you the truth. Ignorance of the swoon theory. The physical condition of the Jesus body makes his death an unquestionable fact. After being battered by scourging and torn by crucifixion, it was then mutilated by the Roman pike. His blood corpuscles had separated from his blood plasma. His body was dead. Completely dead. What had happened? His heart had exploded, ruptured, and inside that net that surrounds the heart, all of the blood gathered, and when he rammed his pike up there, that burst open, and blood and water came out. He was already dead. Those who claim that Jesus revived in the cool dampness of the tomb must respond to the following questions. 1. How did Jesus free himself from the cast surrounding his body? How did he get out of that? It wasn't disheveled. How did Jesus get out of the secured tomb? How did he get out of there? It's secure. How did Jesus escape the 16 Roman soldiers who were waiting outside the tomb with their Roman pikes to kill him or kill anyone who went in to get him? How did he get by them? Was Jesus a first century Superman? Have to be. Have to be if he escaped that. After Jesus was battered by scourging, torn by crucifixion, and mutilated by a Roman pike, if anyone wants to maintain that he survived and was nearly destroyed body was somehow able to escape out of the body cast without harming it, find his way to the secured stone and somehow roll it away from inside the dark tomb, and then defeat 16 Roman guards, that person would necessarily have to admit that Jesus was a superhuman. You'd have to admit that. None of that happened. That's not the way it happened. How it happened was, the angel of the Lord came, removed the stone, and said, look, the body's gone. It's already gone. The grave clothes are left lying in their folds, undisturbed. Only God could do such a thing. Jesus himself is God. He made us. He's the creator, God. He created everything in this world. Created us. And he's going to someday, after you are buried and your body has gone back to the dirt from which it came, he's going to resurrect your body, the body that went there. He's going to raise it from the dead. Put it right back together perfectly, like you would have been when you were full grown. Let's look at the summary of this. And so what John is saying, here's the reason for believing. The tomb was empty. The grave clothes were lying. The napkin is rolled up in a place by itself. 3 great proofs. When you examine them and look at the evidence itself, they're absolutely undeniable proofs of his resurrection from the dead. Such evidence as that is undeniable. And so John concludes, they saw and believed. What is the function of reason? It's to sit in judgment on the evidence, the facts in the case, and to draw a reasonable conclusion that agrees with the claim. Jesus said, in 3 days, I'm going to be raised from the dead. That's his claim. He has to do that or his claim is no good. That's why God made sure that there was such preparation made for Jesus' burial and such security made after he was buried that no one could ever doubt that God raised him from the dead. No one. Christ claimed to be the Son of God. And eyewitnesses claimed to see him for 40 days after the resurrection. What does the evidence say? He's alive. It says he's alive. What does your reason conclude? When you look at this evidence, what does your brain tell you? It tells you humans couldn't do this at all. To conclude that Christ was raised is a logical deduction. Logical. It doesn't insult your intelligence. It causes you to use your brain. Since Jesus did actually rise from the dead, the following two implications have been proven. Number one, he's the Son of God. That's true. Number two, he died for a reason. His death was a redemptive act to buy men back. That's why he died. He said he came to redeem us, to buy us back from Satan with his own self. Jesus died. Jesus was buried according to the burial custom of the Jews. Jesus' friends didn't steal his body, and Jesus' enemies didn't take his body either. Jesus rose from the dead just as he said he would, just like he said he would. Christianity stands, and the Christian faith is affirmed. The salvation of all those who have believed is assured. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart, what? That God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. The evidence of the resurrection is so powerful. And God says, if you believe in your heart that I raised him from the dead, and you confess him with your mouth, you'll be saved. You have to do that. The tomb is open and empty. The grave clothes were left undisturbed in their folds, and it's powerful evidence. Like those men said at the beginning of our study, irrefutable evidence that Jesus is raised from the dead. That's your lesson. I want to encourage you, those of you